My name is Sergeant Mateo Villarreal, and I commit these words to paper while my hand yet trembles and the lamp oil runs low. Should this account survive what I cannot, let it stand as testimony to events that transpired at the Patagonian Outpost of San Julian between the months of March and June in the year of our Lord 1811. I write not for glory nor absolution, but because silence would be a greater sin than the cowardice some will surely name me for. The posting came through official channels in February. Captain Rodrigo Salazar required additional men at the southern garrison, a crumbling fortification that marked the uttermost reach of Spanish authority along that desolate coast. I had served 12 years in the Colonial Guard, long enough to recognize a punishment detail when orders arrived. My superiors in Buenos Aires made no secret of their displeasure with my testimony regarding supply diversions. The assignment to San Julian carried the perfume of exile. We departed on the 8th of March aboard a supply vessel that reeked of salt cod and tar. Myself, 4 conscripts barely old enough to shave, and a Franciscan chaplain named Father Tomas who spent the voyage in silent prayer. The journey south took 19 days through waters that grew steadily colder and more savage. When the coastline finally emerged from the morning mist, I understood why hardened sailors crossed themselves at the mention of this place. The land presented itself as a wound upon the earth. Cliffs of dark stone rose from beaches of gray sand and rounded stones. No trees softened the horizon, only scrub brush and thorny grasses that bent perpetually eastward under winds that never ceased their assault. The sky hung low and colorless, neither fully overcast nor clear, as though the sun had reconsidered its duty to illuminate this margin of the world. San Julian consisted of a wooden palisade surrounding 4 structures in various states of decay. The main barracks housed perhaps 30 men, though we would discover the true count stood lower. A separate officers' quarters leaned slightly southward, its foundation undermined by the previous winter's frost. The chapel measured no more than 12 feet square, barely adequate for Massachusetts. The 4th building served as storehouse and armory, its door reinforced with iron bands that seemed excessive for a garrison this remote. Captain Salazar met us at the gate. He stood perhaps 50 years of age, his face weathered to the texture of ship's leather, his eyes carrying the peculiar flatness I had observed in men who had witnessed events they chose not to discuss. He inspected us without enthusiasm. "You are late by 3 days," he said, though he made no inquiry as to the delay caused by headwinds. "Corporal Vega will assign your quarters and duties. We maintain watch rotations without fail. No man leaves the palisade without authorization and accompaniment." These are not suggestions. The briefness of his welcome struck me as notable, as did the absence of the customary pleasantries exchanged between officers. He turned away before I could respond, his boots grinding against the courtyard's packed earth. Corporal Vega proved more forthcoming, though his information arrived in fragments as he led us to the barracks. A squat man with indigenous features and a nervous habit of glancing toward the southern wall, he explained the garrison's purpose in maintaining Spanish claims to this section of coast, deterring English and Portuguese encroachment, and monitoring the nomadic peoples who occasionally appeared seeking trade. "How many men present for duty?" I asked. Vega paused mid-step. 23 as of this morning, Sergeant. 28 with your arrival. The manifest indicated 35 when I departed Buenos Aires. "Yes," Vega said, and offered nothing further. The barracks interior smelled of damp wool and would smoke inadequately vented. Narrow bunks lined the walls in double tiers. A central stove provided the only heat, fed by driftwood and dried grasses gathered daily from the beach. The men inside looked up at our entrance with expressions devoid of curiosity or welcome. They registered our presence and returned to their occupations, mending clothes, cleaning muskets, carving small objects from bits of bone. I noted their pallor immediately. Even accounting for the weak southern light, these men appeared bleached, their skin carrying an unhealthy translucence. Several bore poorly healed wounds, gashes on forearms, torn fingers, a facial laceration that had left a raised purple scar from temple to jaw. None met my gaze directly. That first evening we took our meal in silence. The fare consisted of salt pork boiled with dried peas and ship's biscuit, accompanied by a weak beer that tasted of the barrel's rot. Father Tomas offered a blessing that no one attended. The scraping of spoons against tin bowls provided the only sound beyond the wind's perpetual assault on the palisade walls. After the meal, I sought the captain in his quarters. He sat at a desk covered with maps and reports, a single candle providing insufficient illumination for the work before him. He did not invite me to sit. "I require clarity regarding the garrison's strength," I said. "The discrepancy between official numbers and actual personnel suggests losses that have not been reported through proper channels." Salazar set down his quill with deliberate care. "The reports have been filed. Response from Buenos Aires proceeds according to their schedule, which bears no relationship to conditions in the field." "What manner of losses?" "Desertion primarily. Some illness. The isolation proves difficult for certain temperaments." He returned his attention to the papers before him. "You will assume responsibility for the Southern Watch rotation. For men, 6-hour shifts, relieved at dawn and dusk. Corporal Vega will provide specific instructions." "Captain, I must understand." "You must follow orders, Sergeant. As must we all." His tone carried a finality that permitted no further inquiry. "Dismissed." I withdrew into the night, where the wind carried smells I could not identify, salt certainly, and kelp rotting on the titterline, but beneath these something else. Something that suggested old iron and the peculiar sweetness that accompanies meat left too long from preservation. I attributed it to my unfamiliarity with the region's character. The Southern Watch position occupied a platform built against the palisade's highest point, affording a view across perhaps 2 miles of coastal plain before the land rose into rocky hills. In daylight the prospect revealed nothing but gray earth, scattered stones, and the ever-present thorny vegetation. At night it became an absence, a void where vision failed and the wind's voice changed character. I took my first watch rotation on the second night of our arrival, accompanied by Private Echevarria, a conscript from Córdoba who had not yet completed his 18th year. He carried himself with the rigid posture of the newly trained, his musket held at precise angles, his responses crisp and immediate. The dark had not yet taught him its lessons. "How long have the others served here?" I asked as we climbed to the platform. "I cannot say, Sergeant. They do not speak of it." He positioned himself at the northern end of the watch post, maintaining the regulation distance. Corporal Vega mentioned some have been present since the outpost's establishment in 1809. 2 years in this place seemed sufficient to explain the men's depleted condition. I had served in remote locations before, the Chaco, the Upper Parana, but those wildernesses had contained life. Birds, insects, the movements of game animals. Here the silence sat heavy and deliberate, broken only by wind and the distant percussion of waves against stone. The first hours passed without incident. Echevarria maintained his watch with admirable discipline. I occupied myself reviewing the garrison's daily logs, which I had obtained from Vega earlier that day. The entries followed standard format: weather conditions, supplies consumed, duties performed, watches maintained. Yet certain dates bore annotations that troubled me. March 17th, Lopez failed to report for dawn watch. Located on beach. Returned to duty. March 23rd, Hernandez absent from evening formation. Found 2 miles south at dawn. No explanation provided. April 2nd, supplied reduced watch to 3 men per rotation. Illness affects 5 personnel. April 9th, Private Ruiz missing. Search conducted to 4 miles radius. No trace recovered. April 14th, Captain authorizes reduced patrol distance. No excursions beyond sight of palisade. The pattern suggested not illness but something that drew men from the safety of the garrison, compelling them toward the empty lands to the south. I turned to ask Echevarria if he had heard the men discuss these incidents, but the question died unspoken. He stood motionless at the platform's edge, his head tilted as though listening to something I could not hear. His musket hung loose in his hands, forgotten. "Private," I said quietly. He did not respond. The wind had died to nothing, the first true stillness I had experienced since our arrival. In that suspension of air, I became aware of a sound that came from the south. Not wind, not waves, but something that moved beneath those familiar textures. A rhythm that suggested vast size displacing itself across stone and earth. Echevarria. I placed my hand on his shoulder. He startled violently, nearly dropping his weapon. "Sergeant, I apologize, I thought I heard," he stopped, uncertainty crossing his features. "It was nothing. The wind plays tricks." But the wind had ceased entirely. The sound continued for perhaps 20 seconds more, a dragging weight that traveled from west to east across the invisible plain. Then it too stopped, and the wind resumed its familiar assault as though it had never paused. We completed the watch without speaking of it. When Corporal Vega arrived with our relief, I noted the tightness around his eyes, the way his gaze moved immediately to the southern darkness before acknowledging our presence. "Anything to report?" he asked. I considered my response carefully. "Quiet night. Private Echevarria maintained excellent discipline." Vega nodded slowly. "Good. That is good." He hesitated, then added, "The southern quadrant sometimes produces unusual acoustic effects. The cliffs and wind. A man can hear things that are not there, or fail to hear things that are. Best not to give such phenomena undue attention." The dismissal felt rehearsed, a warning delivered in the syntax of advice. I descended from the platform troubled less by what I had heard than by the garrison's obvious policy of denying such experiences formal acknowledgement. Dawn brought a cold rain that turned the courtyard to mud and forced the men to labor inside, mending equipment and preparing supplies for the monthly inventory. I used the opportunity to observe the garrison's personnel more closely. Of the 23 men present, 5 showed signs of significant injury beyond the normal wear of military service. Private Santana bore scars across both palms as though he had grasped something with cutting edges. Private Costa walked with a limp that suggested a poorly healed break. Corporal Mendez kept his left arm tight against his body, favoring damaged ribs. When I inquired about the medical log, Vega informed me it had been lost during a roof collapse the previous winter, along with most of the medical supplies. The nearest surgeon resided in Buenos Aires, a month's journey under favorable conditions. "Then how are injuries treated?" "Father Tomas has some knowledge of medicine. He does what he can." Vega's expression suggested the chaplain's knowledge proved inadequate to the demands placed upon it. I found Father Tomas in the chapel, kneeling before a plain wooden cross. The rain drummed against the roof's warped boards with a sound like fingers searching for entry. He did not rise when I entered, only gestured for me to kneel beside him. "Have you come to confess, my son?" His voice carried the soft accent of Castile, refined and out of place in this crude shelter. "I have come to ask about the men's injuries." He crossed himself and rose stiffly, his joints protesting the damp cold. In daylight I could see he was younger than I had first assumed, perhaps 35, but worn by privation or worry into premature age. "I do what I can with bandages and prayer. The Lord provides according to his wisdom, which surpasses our understanding." The formula emerged automatically, a defense against questions he preferred not to answer. "Father, I have served long enough to distinguish wounds received in normal duty from those that speak to unusual circumstances. These men have encountered something that inflicts damage of a specific nature." He moved to the chapel's single window, a narrow gap shuttered against the rain. "Captain Salazar believes in maintaining discipline through routine and silence. He fears that acknowledging certain difficulties would undermine the men's morale and resolve. Acknowledging saves lives, Father. Denial buries them." "Yes," he said softly. "Yes, it does." He turned to face me, and I saw in his eyes the same haunted quality that characterized every man in this place. 3 weeks ago, Private Dominguez went missing during the morning watch. We found him at midday, 1 mile south of the palisade. He was still alive, but the priest's hands moved helplessly. His injuries were extensive. He died within the hour. Could not speak, could only, he stopped. Could only what? Point. Toward the south. As though something there demanded his attention even in his final moments. The rain continued for 4 days, transforming the outpost into a prison of mud and cold water that found every gap in the structure's defenses. The men grew restless, their silence deepening into something more troubling than mere discipline. I observed them watching the southern wall during rare moments when duties brought them near it, their attention drawn by compulsions they could not or would not name. On the 5th day the weather cleared, and Captain Salazar ordered a supply-gathering expedition to the beach. 6 men would collect driftwood and kelp, essential materials for fuel and the crude insulation we stuffed into wall gaps. I volunteered to lead the detail, seeking an opportunity to examine the terrain beyond the palisade's confines. Salazar studied me with an expression approaching pity. Take Corporal Vega and 5 men. Do not range beyond the immediate beach. Return before midday. We departed through the eastern gate shortly after dawn. The 6 men assigned to my command moved with obvious reluctance, their hands never straying far from their weapons despite the absence of any visible threat. The beach lay a quarter mile from the garrison, accessed by a path worn into the stony ground. The tide had retreated, exposing perhaps 100 yards of gray sand littered with debris thrown up by recent storms. Kelp lay in tangled heaps, its smell sharp and organic against the clean scent of cold seawater. Driftwood scattered along the titterline in pale fragments, most pieces small and weathered smooth, but occasional timbers of significant size that suggested wrecks occurring far out in the dark waters. The men set to their work with mechanical efficiency, gathering materials into bundles that could be dragged back to the outpost. I walked the beach's length, examining the stones and studying the cliff faces that rose to the south. The rock bore a strange quality, its surface marked by formations I could not readily explain, deep grooves that ran horizontally for dozens of yards, as though something of great size had abraded itself against the stone in passing. I climbed to where the beach met the base of the nearest cliff, finding there a narrow shelf sheltered from direct observation by a projection of rock. What I discovered in that shadowed space drove the breath from my lungs. A musket lay half buried in sand, its wooden stock splintered as though crushed by tremendous pressure. Beside it rested a leather belt and brass buckle, badly corroded but clearly military issue. Fragments of cloth, faded to colorlessness, clung to the rocks. And pressed into the sand where some flood of water or other liquid had dried, I saw a shape. It resembled no footprint produced by man or known animal. Perhaps 3 feet in length, it consisted of an elongated oval from which extended several appendages. I counted 7 before the impression became too faint to follow. Each appendage terminated in what appeared to be a cluster of smaller impressions, suggesting not toes or claws but something more complex, articulated in ways that defied immediate comprehension. Sergeant Villarreal. Corporal Vega's voice came from the beach below. We should return. I descended to find the men standing motionless, their bundles of wood and kelp forgotten on the sand. They faced not toward me but south, their attention fixed on something I could not see. The wind had died again, and in that stillness I heard it clearly, the sound from my first watch, but closer now. Much closer. It came from beyond the nearest rise of cliff, perhaps a half-mile distant. That dragging weight, massive and deliberate, accompanied by a sound like water moving through stone channels. And beneath these, barely audible, something that might have been breathing if breathing could sound wet and multilayered, as though produced by structures not designed for air. Back to the garrison, I said quietly. Maintain formation. Do not run. The walk across that quarter mile of exposed ground remains among the longest of my life. Every instinct demanded we flee, yet I knew flight would trigger something worse than disciplined withdrawal. The men held their positions, though I heard their breathing grow rapid and shallow. The sounds behind us continued, neither approaching nor receding, simply maintaining presence as though content to observe our retreat. We reached the palisade to find Captain Salazar waiting at the gate, his face carved from stone. He counted us through and ordered the gate barred immediately. "My quarters," he said to me. "Now." I followed him across the courtyard, aware of the men's eyes tracking our movement. Inside the officers' quarters, Salazar poured 2 measures of aguardiente from a dwindling bottle and pushed one toward me. "You heard it," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." He drank and refilled his glass. "They come more frequently now. In the beginning, when I first arrived, we might go weeks without incident. Then days. Now," he gestured toward the southern wall. "Now they are present most nights. Sometimes during the day if conditions favor them. I do not know what they are. I have never seen one clearly. None of us have, save for Dominguez, and he could not speak of it before he died." Salazar moved to his desk and retrieved a leather folder, badly worn. "These are the true reports. Not the sanitized versions I sent to Buenos Aires. The documents within detailed a pattern of escalating encounters spanning 18 months. Initial incidents consisted of distant sounds and strange marks found beyond the palisade. Then men began disappearing during watches, found later in states of confusion, unable to account for missing hours. The first death occurred in November 1810, a private who had wandered from the garrison during the night and was discovered at dawn, his body bearing injuries that suggested he had been partially consumed by something possessing neither teeth nor claws but some other mechanism for rendering flesh. The reports documented 12 deaths and 6 disappearances that could not be attributed to natural causes or desertion. Captain Salazar had written each account in careful detail, including witness statements and his own observations. His earlier entries reflected the confusion and denial of a rational man confronted with phenomena that violated reasonable explanation. The later documents showed a different author, one who had accepted impossible facts and now struggled only to maintain discipline while awaiting relief that he knew would never arrive. "Why has Buenos Aires not responded?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "They do not believe. Or they choose not to believe, which amounts to the same." Salazar retrieved another folder, this one containing replies to his reports. The earliest responses requested clarification and additional evidence. The middle correspondence suggested that stress and isolation had compromised his judgment. The most recent letters reassigned blame, hinting that poor leadership and inadequate discipline created conditions that allowed men to succumb to superstition and panic. They will not send reinforcements or evacuation. They will wait until this outpost fails completely, then write it off to the difficulties of maintaining presence in such remote territory. He finished his aguardiente. "In the meantime, we persist because abandoning our posts constitutes desertion, punishable by death. Someone in authority must be made to understand. Who? And how?" Salazar's laugh carried no humor. "Send another letter describing creatures that emerge from the sea or the earth or wherever they originate, that kill men using methods we cannot explain or defend against. Request that colonial administrators who have never left Buenos Aires authorize resources based on the word of a disgraced captain posting from the edge of the world." The futility of our situation settled upon me like physical weight. We occupied a trap, bound by duty to remain while whatever hunted these shores consumed us by degrees. "What do they want?" I asked. "I have theories. None bring comfort." Salazar moved to his window, looking out at the gray afternoon. "Initially I believed them animals, some unknown species native to these waters. But animals follow patterns. They hunt for food or territory. These," he paused, selecting words carefully. "These seem to regard us as anomalies. Intrusions into space they consider their own. They remove us not with the urgency of predators but with the patience of owners clearing unwanted elements from their property." "How do you know this?" "Because they could destroy us at any time. The palisade would not stop them, would not even slow them. Yet they take us singly or in small numbers, always when we venture beyond the walls or during night watches when men are isolated. It suggests intelligence and restraint. They are teaching us to fear, to remain confined, to understand that our presence here exists only by their sufferance. Father Tomas entered without knocking, his face flushed with alarm. "Captain, you must come. Private Santana has gone missing from the storehouse." We rushed across the courtyard to find 3 men gathered at the storehouse entrance. The reinforced door stood open, its iron bands twisted outward as though forced by pressure from within. Inside, supplies lay scattered but not ransacked. Santana's musket rested against a barrel of salt pork. His belt and equipment lay in a neat pile, as if carefully removed and set aside. "He was conducting inventory alone," Corporal Vega said. I stepped away for perhaps 10 minutes. When I returned, the door was like this. I examined the twisted iron. The metal had not broken but deformed, stretched beyond its capacity while maintaining structural integrity. No tool wielded by human hands could produce such an effect without noise or extended effort. "Search the compound," Salazar ordered. "Every structure. Every shadow." The search consumed the afternoon and produced nothing. Santana had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. As darkness approached, the captain ordered all personnel confined to the barracks under guard. No watches would be posted this night. We would secure ourselves behind what defenses we possessed and wait for dawn. The men crowded into the main barracks, their fear finally overwhelming the discipline that had kept them silent. They spoke in low voices of things they had seen and heard during their time at San Julian. Private Costa described finding marks on the walls, symbols or patterns formed by some scraping implement, arranged in sequences that hurt to examine for more than a few seconds. Corporal Mendez told of a morning when he had found his clothing moved during the night, carefully folded and placed in different positions while he slept. Others reported sounds beneath the compound, not distant but directly below, as though something moved through spaces that should not exist under the packed earth and stone foundations. Several men claimed to have seen shadows during the day that possessed neither source nor proper relation to the sun's position, shapes that moved with liquid grace and seemed aware of observation. Father Tomas led prayers that no one followed. The words fell flat in the close air, as meaningless as wishes cast into an abyss. I sat with my back against the wall, musket across my knees, listening to the wind increase its assault on the compound. Midnight arrived marked only by the guttering of candles. In the darkness, the men's breathing formed a collective rhythm punctuated by shifting bodies and whispered conversations that died before reaching coherence. I forced myself to remain alert despite exhaustion, knowing sleep would bring vulnerability. The sound, when it came, did not originate from beyond the walls but from beneath us. A scraping drag, slow and impossibly patient, that traveled the length of the barracks floor. Several men cried out. Someone lit a lantern with shaking hands. The flame revealed nothing but rough planks and the spaces between them, gaps that should have led only to dead air and earth. The scraping continued, reaching the eastern end of the building, then stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard breathing. Not our own, but something that moved air in volumes suggesting vast capacity. It came from the gap where the wall met the floor, a wet exhalation carrying the smell of deep ocean trenches and things that lived in permanent darkness. Then a voice. I hesitate to name it such, for it possessed no human quality save that it formed sounds approximating language. Words emerged in broken Spanish, each syllable requiring tremendous effort, as though shaped by structures never meant to produce human speech. Go, from here. No man moved. We remained frozen, our collective breath held, as the voice continued its labored construction of meaning. This place, not yours. Captain Salazar recovered first. He moved to the wall, kneeling to address the gap where the breathing originated. We are soldiers of Spain, performing duties assigned by legitimate authority. We mean no harm to. The breathing intensified, becoming agitated, and the voice cut through his words with sounds that hurt the ear, syllables that seemed to arrive from impossible angles. Not first, not last, all go down to the deep places. The breathing ceased. The presence beneath us withdrew with that dragging scrape, moving away into distances that should not have existed below a structure built on solid earth. The smell lingered, brine and rot and something else that suggested vast age, time measured in scales that made human history insignificant. Father Tomas vomited in the corner. 2 men wept openly. Captain Salazar remained kneeling, his hand pressed against the wall as though he might derive some understanding from the wood itself. "Pack essential supplies," he said finally. "We abandoned the garrison at first light." "Captain, our orders," Corporal Vega began. "Our orders did not contemplate this. No authority exists that can compel men to remain in the face of." Salazar's gesture encompassed the barracks, the compound, the entire situation we inhabited. "We make for the coast. Perhaps we can signal a passing vessel." Dawn seemed impossibly distant. We maintained vigil through the remaining hours, every man armed, the lanterns burning despite our dwindling oil reserves. The sounds continued throughout the night, not beneath us again, but circling the compound. That patient dragging weight, moving from south to east to north, occasionally pausing as though examining our defenses or simply reminding us of its presence. When gray light finally penetrated the barracks' crude windows, we prepared for departure with mechanical efficiency. Each man assembled a pack containing food for 1 week, water skins, essential equipment. We would travel light and fast, making for the coast where our supply vessel might return in 3 weeks' time. Captain Salazar divided us into 3 groups of 10 men each, spaced at 50-yard intervals to prevent a single attack from eliminating our entire force. I would lead the first group, Corporal Vega the second, and Salazar would bring up the rear with the remaining men. We gathered in the courtyard as the sun struggled to penetrate the perpetual coastal overcast. The palisade walls that had seemed substantial upon my arrival now appeared pathetically inadequate, crude barriers that had never protected us but merely defined the space of our confinement. "Open the gate," Salazar ordered. The heavy wooden portal swung inward. Beyond lay the familiar path leading to the beach, empty and unremarkable in the morning light. Nothing moved in the gray landscape. No sounds disturbed the wind's constant voice. My group advanced first, maintaining spacing and fields of fire as we had been trained. The path revealed no signs of threat. Behind us, I heard Vega's group begin their advance, then Salazar's bringing up the rear. We covered perhaps 300 yards before Private Echevarria, walking at my right, made a sound between a gasp and a sob. I followed his gaze to a rock formation 50 yards off our path. Private Santana sat there, upright and apparently unharmed. He faced toward us, his hands resting on his knees, his expression peaceful. He did not move as we approached. "Santana," I called. "Come to formation. We are evacuating the garrison." He did not respond. Did not acknowledge our presence in any way. I moved closer, raising my hand to signal the others to remain at distance. 20 feet from him, I understood. His eyes were open but did not track my movement. His chest did not rise with breathing. His skin bore the waxy translucence of death, yet no visible injury marked his body. "Sergeant." Echevarria's voice cracked with strain. I circled Santana's position, maintaining distance. From the side, I saw what frontal view had concealed. His back had been opened cleanly, the flesh parted with surgical precision from neck to waist. The wound's edges showed no tearing or trauma, rather, they appeared deliberate, as though something had carefully accessed his interior and removed specific elements. "Keep moving," I ordered. "Do not break formation." We continued our advance, but the pattern had been established. Every 100 yards we encountered another body. Private Costa sat against a boulder, positioned as though resting during a difficult march. Corporal Mendez lay on his side in an attitude of peaceful sleep. Each man showed the same careful opening, the same precise removal of internal structures. By the time we reached the beach, we had counted 9 dead. 9 men taken from the garrison during the night while we huddled in the barracks, positioned along our escape route like markers or warnings. The beach stretched empty before us. No vessel waited at anchor. No salvation presented itself beyond miles of cold water under an indifferent sky. Captain Salazar called a halt at the titterline. His face had aged a decade during the morning's march. He looked at the 9 bodies we had documented, then at the 21 men who remained alive. "They are showing us what they could have done at any time," he said quietly. "They want us to understand our impotence." "What do we do?" Vega asked, and in his voice I heard the question's deeper meaning. What can we do? What hope exists against something that moves unseen, that kills without confrontation, that speaks from beneath the earth with intelligence alien and vast? "We wait here until the supply ship returns," Salazar said. "We maintain watch in groups of no fewer than 6 men. We survive the next 3 weeks through discipline and collective vigilance. And when that vessel arrives, we depart this place and we do not return." We established camp against the cliff face, where stone at our backs provided some illusion of security. The 21 survivors divided themselves into 3 watch groups rotating through 8-hour shifts. We burned driftwood constantly, maintaining fires that we hoped might deter approach, though we possessed no evidence that flames held any significance to the things that hunted us. The first 3 days passed in tense quiet. We saw nothing but heard them constantly, sounds from the water and the rocks, movements at the edge of perception that vanished when directly observed. The night stretched interminable, each man's fear feeding the collective dread until we existed in a state of sustained terror that exhausted us more thoroughly than any physical labor. On the 4th day, Private Torres disappeared. He had been sitting with his watch group, surrounded by 6 other men. Someone blinked or looked away, and when they turned back, Torres was gone. No sound had marked his departure. No disturbance indicated struggle. He simply ceased to exist in that moment and space. We found him 2 hours later, positioned at the waterline where waves could lap at his boots. His body bore the familiar opening, and his dead eyes stared at something in the ocean depths that we could not see. Father Tomasa's prayers had devolved into mere rote recitation. He spoke the words automatically while his hands moved in constant, agitated motion, twisting and untwisting a rope segment until the fibers separated. I asked if he wished to speak privately, but he only shook his head. "There is nothing to say that has not been said. Nothing to confess that God does not already know." He looked at me with eyes that held no hope. "We built our churches and missions across this land, believing we brought light to darkness. But the darkness here is older. So much older. And it does not care about our light. The supply ship was due in 17 days. Captain Salazar maintained a detailed log of our situation, writing each day's events in careful script. I asked once why he persisted in this documentation when any reasonable reader would dismiss it as the product of deranged minds. Because truth deserves recording, whether or not it finds belief. He continued writing without looking up. Someone, someday, may need to know what transpired here. That knowledge may prevent other men from being sent to this place, or places like it. If my account serves that purpose, the manner of my death will have meaning beyond mere extinction. More men disappeared. Always during watches, always while surrounded by others who could not explain or prevent their vanishing. The count fell to 18, then 15, then 12. We drew closer together, tightening our perimeter until we sat nearly shoulder to shoulder, each man maintaining physical contact with his neighbors to ensure immediate awareness of any absence. The things in the water grew bolder. We saw them now, though never clearly, shapes that moved beneath the waves too large for any fish, forms that emerged partially at dusk to reveal masses of glistening tissue that might have been flesh or something else entirely. They did not attack but observed, their attention palpable as weight. On the 9th day, Father Tomas walked into the ocean. He rose during the morning watch, moved past the men sitting closest to the water, and continued walking until waves reached his waist. We shouted for him to return. Several men made to pursue him, but Captain Salazar ordered them back. He has made his choice. We cannot save him. The priest turned to face us when the water reached his chest. For a moment clarity returned to his features, and he called out in a voice that carried clearly over the wind. They were here first. We are the trespassers. We are the sin. Then something rose beneath him, and he was pulled down so swiftly that barely a splash marked his passage. The water where he had stood roiled briefly, then calmed. Nothing surfaced. 11 men remained. Captain Salazar called us together that afternoon. We have 9 days until the ship's possible arrival, if it comes at all, if it follows its schedule, if our situation permits us to signal it effectively. These are many uncertainties. I release each of you from obligation to remain. Any man who wishes to attempt escape inland may do so without facing charges of desertion. No one moved. We understood what he offered, the illusion of choice where none existed. Death here or death elsewhere, but death certainly. At least here we faced it together, maintaining the discipline that defined us even as that definition became meaningless. The days blurred into continuous twilight. We ceased counting hours, marking time only by the rotation of watch duties and the diminishing count of survivors. 8 men. 6 men. 4. I was there at the end, one of the final 4 alongside Captain Salazar, Corporal Vega, and Private Echevarria. We sat in a tight circle around our last fire, burning the final scraps of wood we had collected. The supply ship was now 2 days overdue. No sail had appeared on the horizon. I am going to walk south, Salazar said. Not to the water, but inland. To see what can be seen. Captain, that is suicide. Remaining here is suicide of longer duration. I prefer to meet whatever comes with eyes open. He stood, checking his musket's load, though we all knew the weapon's uselessness. If the ship arrives, depart immediately. Do not wait for those who are absent. He walked into the gathering dusk. We watched his figure diminish against the gray landscape until darkness obscured him completely. He did not cry out. No sounds indicated his fate. He simply passed beyond our perception and did not return. 3 of us. We lasted 1 more day before Corporal Vega succumbed to the despair that had been eroding him since San Julian. I woke at dawn to find him gone, his musket and equipment left behind in careful arrangement. We found no body. He had walked into the ocean as Father Tomas had, choosing the manner of his end rather than waiting for it to be imposed. 2 of us remained, myself and Private Echevarria, who had not yet turned 19 years old. We sat with our backs to the cliff and watched the empty horizon where no salvation would appear. Sergeant, he said during the second night of our vigil, do you believe in God? I considered the question carefully. I believe in many things I cannot explain. Whether those things align with the teachings of the Church, I cannot say. Father Tomas said we were the sin. That we were trespassing. Echevarria fed another piece of driftwood to our failing fire. Do you think that is true? I think we are small creatures who ventured into spaces we did not understand, guided by authorities who knew even less than we did. Whether that constitutes sin or merely ignorance, I leave to greater minds than mine. I do not want to die here. No man does. Yet here we are. He was silent for a time. Then, if you survive and I do not, will you tell my mother that I served with honor? If I survive, I will tell her that her son faced the incomprehensible with courage and maintained his discipline to the end. I will tell her that he died in service to Spain, though Spain did not deserve his service or even believe the truth of his sacrifice. That will be enough. On the 4th day after Salazar's departure, I realized we were being given a choice. The pattern had become clear through observation. Men who walked willingly toward the things, into the water or south into the hills, vanished without the terrible open bodies left as markers. Those who attempted to flee or resist faced that careful dissection, positioned where others would find them. It suggested intelligence and perhaps even mercy of a sort, though mercy defined by utterly alien parameters. They are offering us terms, I said to Echevarria. Walk to them willingly, or wait here until they take us by force. Is there no third option? If there is, I have not discovered it. We debated our choice through the day as the fire burned lower and our supplies of wood reached exhaustion. When darkness fell complete, we sat in cold silence, listening to the sounds from the water and the rocks. "I am going to walk south," Echevarria said finally. "Like the captain did. If I must go to them, I prefer to meet them in my own time." "I understand." He stood, checking his weapon one final time, though we both knew its uselessness. He looked down at me and managed something approaching a smile. "Will you come?" "No. I will wait here. Someone must remain to record what occurred, should any chance of transmission exist." "Then I suppose this is farewell, Sergeant. Go with God, Private." He walked into the darkness. I listened to his boots scraping on stone, the sounds diminishing until the wind and waves obscured them completely. He did not cry out. No indication marked his passage from life to whatever lay beyond. I sat alone on that beach for 3 more days. I do not know why they left me unmolested. Perhaps they had lost interest, perhaps they considered a single man insufficient threat to require removal, perhaps they simply enjoyed watching me wait. On the 3rd day of my solitude, a sail appeared on the horizon. The vessel approached slowly, tacking against the wind. I built a signal fire from the last remains of our driftwood pile, feeding it with strips of cloth torn from my uniform. The ship altered course, making for the beach where I stood. It was not our supply vessel but a merchant brig flying Portuguese colors, making its way north from the South Atlantic hunting grounds. The captain agreed to take me aboard after I promised payment upon reaching Buenos Aires. He asked no questions about why a Spanish soldier stood alone on that desolate coast, and I offered no explanations. As we departed, I looked back at the beach and the cliffs beyond. Positioned at the waterline, visible even from the distance of our departure, stood the remaining bodies of my garrison. 27 men arranged in a line facing the sea, their open backs toward the land, positioned where any passing vessel would see them clearly. A message. A warning. A declaration of ownership. The Portuguese captain followed my gaze and crossed himself. "This is an evil place," he said quietly. "Ships avoid these waters when possible. Bad things happen to crews who linger. How long has this been known?" "Always. The hunters from the south tell stories of the things in these waters that extend back before any European arrived. The native peoples would not come here. They said it belonged to the old ones, the things from before the land took its present shape." I spent the voyage to Buenos Aires committing my account to paper. When we made port, I presented myself and my report to colonial authorities. I was received with courtesy and suspicion in equal measure. The commanding officer read my account while I stood at attention in his office. When he finished, he set the papers aside and studied me with an expression approaching pity. "Sergeant Villarreal, you have clearly endured significant hardship and trauma. I am ordering you to the hospital for evaluation and rest. Once you have recovered, we will discuss your future posting. Sir, the garrison at San Julian will be addressed through appropriate channels. Your report has been noted and will be filed accordingly." I remained in the hospital for 6 weeks while physicians evaluated my mental state. They prescribed rest and tonics. They suggested my experiences had been colored by isolation, stress, and possibly fever. When I persisted in my account, they grew less gentle in their assessments, suggesting that continued insistence on these claims would result in discharge from service under medical disability. I learned silence. I accepted their diagnoses and treatments. I spoke the words they wished to hear, that I had been mistaken, that fear and privation had distorted my perceptions, that I understood no such things as I described could exist in God's rational creation. They released me in September with orders to report to a garrison in Mendoza, far from the coast and whatever truths lay along its shores. I did not report. Instead, I used my remaining pay to purchase passage on a merchant vessel bound for Spain, intending to present my case to higher authorities who might possess the will or wisdom to act. The voyage took 4 months. During that time, I researched what I could of Patagonia's history and the accounts of previous expeditions to those waters. I found fragments, records of ships that vanished, coastal settlements that failed, native accounts dismissed as superstition. The pattern extended back centuries, but always the same response from authorities: silence, denial, willful ignorance. In Madrid I was received by a series of minor officials, each referring me to another slightly more senior figure, none willing to engage seriously with my report. My account was deemed interesting but unreliable. I was thanked for my service and informed that my observations had been noted. I understood then that no authority would act. The things at San Julian would continue their patient removal of human intrusions, and each time men would be sent without warning or preparation. Reports would be filed and dismissed. The pattern would repeat across decades or centuries until finally Spain abandoned its claims to those territories and the coast returned to its proper owners. I write this final account in a boarding house in Madrid, having exhausted my resources and options. I have made copies of my full testimony and distributed them to various parties, journalists, church officials, scientific societies. Most have been ignored. Some have generated brief interest before being dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized soldier or an elaborate fabrication. Tomorrow I depart for the coast, to a fishing village where I have heard similar stories emerge from men who work the deep waters. I will gather what accounts I can and attempt to establish a pattern that cannot be dismissed. If I fail, if I too am labeled mad or unreliable, then at least I will have tried to honor the deaths of the men who served under that gray sky at the edge of the world. Mateo Villarreal, former sergeant of the Spanish Colonial Guard, sets down his pen on this 18th day of March, 1812. May God have mercy on the souls of the lost, and may those who read these words possess the wisdom to heed their warning. The official records show that the garrison at San Julian was abandoned in August 1811 due to supply difficulties and harsh conditions. No mention appears of casualties beyond routine levels expected in such remote postings. Captain Rodrigo Salazar is listed as having retired from service. The 27 men of his final garrison are recorded as deserters or transferred to other posts, their names scattered across documents that do not bear close examination. A new garrison was established at San Julian in 1815. It lasted 7 months before being quietly abandoned. No third attempt was made. Mateo Villarreal's testimony was discovered among the papers of Father Gregorio Valdez, a Franciscan scholar interested in colonial frontier accounts. Father Valdez made no comment on the document's contents, filing it among other accounts of unusual occurrences in Spain's American territories. It remained there for 93 years. In 1905, an Argentine archaeological expedition working along the Patagonian coast discovered a series of bodies buried in the sand above the Titiline near the abandoned site of San Julian. 27 skeletons, arranged in a line, each bearing evidence of precise post-mortem damage to the posterior thorax. The lead archaeologist noted the unusual positioning and condition of the remains but could offer no explanation. His report suggested possible ritual sacrifice by unknown indigenous peoples. The remains were removed to Buenos Aires for study. During transport, the ship carrying them encountered severe storms and was forced to jettison cargo. The crates containing the skeletons were among the items lost overboard, approximately 17 miles off the coast near San Julian. In 1932, the Argentine government proposed establishing a permanent weather station at San Julian to improve maritime safety along that section of coast. The proposal was approved and a team of 7 men departed to survey the site. Radio contact was maintained for 4 days. On the 5th day, transmission ceased. A rescue ship found the camp abandoned, equipment intact, no signs of struggle or distress. The 7 men were never located. No further attempts were made to establish permanent presence at San Julian. The site is now marked on maritime charts with a notation recommending ships maintain distance from shore. Local fishermen will not work those waters after dark. Mateo Villarreal's testimony was published in an obscure academic journal in 1923, presented as an example of psychological trauma and colonial-era superstition. The editor included a lengthy commentary explaining the document as a case study in how isolation and stress produce delusional systems. Villarreal himself died in 1834 in Galicia, having never returned to the Americas. His death was recorded as accidental drowning. Witnesses reported he walked into the sea one morning and did not resist when the water pulled him down. His final entry in a personal journal, dated one day before his death, reads, "They are not confined to one place. They are in all the deep waters. I have tried to warn who would listen, but those who listen are already lost. The ocean is vast and patient, and we are temporary irritants on its surface. I go now to join the others, and perhaps in that joining find understanding that eluded me in life. To whoever finds these papers, do not go to the coasts. Do not venture where the land meets the sea and the water runs dark. They were here first, and they will be here when the last of us has returned to their embrace." The journal was found in his room at a coastal inn. The innkeeper kept it for 30 years before donating it to a local museum, where it remains in storage, uncatalogued and unread, among thousands of other documents from forgotten lives. The waters off San Julian remain undisturbed save by ships that pass at distance, their crews careful never to approach too close to those gray shores where nothing lives and nothing grows except the patient darkness that has waited since before men walked upright, and will wait until long after the last human voice falls silent. This concludes the account of the San Julian garrison, year of our Lord 1811, as recorded and preserved across generations of silence. May those who read it understand what authorities would not, that the world contains spaces never meant for human habitation, and the price of ignoring that truth is paid in blood and bones arranged along forgotten shorelines, warnings that no one heeds until they too add their bodies to the count.